One is, who is a child in immigration law? I think the most common question I was ever asked in the years that I practiced, and I practiced immigration law for 12 years, would be someone say, I've met this wonderful child. I was on vacation in Barbados, or I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Africa, or my husband's company has a plant in Costa Rica, and we would like to give this child an opportunity in America for our educational system. They just don't have those opportunities in the home country. Can we adopt the child? So it's a instinct people have. Sometimes it's your distant cousin or your niece and nephew, and you want to bring them to the United States. Well, first of all, one should know that the statute only recognizes children as children for the purposes of sponsorship if the child is an orphan, if the child's parental rights have been terminated in the home country and a legal adoption has been completed, and that adoption has to be completed before the age of 16. So unfortunately, because of the legal costs both in the home country and the bureaucratic process of going through everything here in the United States, there's a lot of people who, when they're immigrating to the United States lawfully, they've been sponsored, they've waited in the queue, they're finally coming, they'll say to their brothers and sisters, let me take my niece Sally, let me take my nephew Jose, let me bring them as my child. And so our State Department finds a lot of what they call child fraud, child smuggling. That's the benevolent aspect of it. There's also a negative aspect because it is so difficult to bring a child to the United States, even to a relative, because there's no visa category to sponsor your second cousin or to sponsor your nephew. Even if your cultural patterns and your nation would be that you would embrace and educate all those children if you had the economic ability. Because there is no visa pass for that, people sometimes resort to smugglers. In the southern border, we call them coyotes. From the China story, we call them snakeheads. There's been really well-reported books, documentaries, New York Times in-depth stories about children one day being told by their parents, I love you, kissing them on both cheeks, putting a handkerchief in their pocket, and they're handed over to a smuggler. The smuggler may charge $30,000, $40,000 to bring that child to the United States. The children face great danger. Some die in the deserts in the South, some are raped, some are physically abused, but at a minimum, they're traumatized, bringing to the United States. And where do these parents send them? Well, sometimes they send them into the labor force. And so you find teenagers in New York, in Pittsburgh, in Phoenix, that their parents have, with all good intention perhaps, paid a smuggler or told them, go. Because if you can find work in the United States, you're going to have a better life. Also, those children are expected to pay off the smuggler. And if they don't, the smuggler says, well, we know your mother is, we know your little sister is in the home country, and we have a network, it's organized crime, and we'll hurt someone in your home country. So you have perhaps some well-meaning parents victimized by smugglers, but they're desperate to give their children opportunity. Just one more thing about children. We see an increasing number of children coming on their own. And some are teenagers, and they're coming at a young age because in their culture, in their society, they see themselves as working age. They're taking the gamble. They're going to come to the United States. There was an HBO film last week about children hopping freight trains from Central America up through Mexico and then trying to enter the United States. And Julia Preston in the New York Times had a story where the statistics she had for the southern border in the summer of 2009 was 90,000 apprehensions of unaccompanied minors trying to enter the United States. Why would that be happening, not just on the southern border, but also coming through our airports with false passports, or being smuggled in container ships, or being smuggled by boat from the Caribbean or from Europe? Well, it's the world's population. Take a look at the demographics of many countries, and you have large birth populations of young people with few employment opportunities in the sending countries, and people are going to seek economies where there's more opportunity for them to find some kind of living wage. Happily, U.S. law is unique. It's only been a few years that we've had this provision. Congress really generously created a provision called the Special Immigrant Juvenile Provision, that if a child is found by a state juvenile, a court competent to make juvenile determinations. In New York, we call it the family court, and in other jurisdictions, it may be the Supreme Court or the Superior Court, depending on the the name of the tribunal in the state. But if a state finds the child to be awarded the state because they were abused, neglected, or abandoned by their parents, or they're orphaned, that child doesn't have to stay undocumented. They can go through that family court process and then apply for immigration status. And that's a really generous provision. It really allows some children to come out of the shadows, out of exploitative work environments, out of smuggling situations, and acquire status. Now, they have to do that before the age of 21 because in U.S. immigration law, 21 is the cutoff when you become an adult. And that doesn't apply to children who are brought by their parents. And there's an enormous, perhaps millions of people who live in the United States who don't have status, who were brought as infants, 6-month-old, 6 years old, by their parents, maybe across the southern border, across the northern border. Actually, a huge percentage of the people unlawfully present in the United States entered with visas and overstayed. So the family may have come from France on the visa waiver program we have for French nationals, lived as middle-class people in our society, and they're completely out of status. They are as, quote, illegal as someone who crossed the southern border without documents, and those young people are trapped. Yet reform in Congress has been stymied, and it's really a problem because those people may not speak the language of the home country, may have no family in the home country, and if they try to leave the country and then come in again legally, even if they could be sponsored, once they have entered illegally and acquired more than 1 year unlawful presence, the law says they must depart the United States for 10 years. The issue of whether we should have a forgiveness provision for children who were brought before without any volition of their own, right? Their parents brought them, they took no act to further their own illegal entry into the United States or overstay of a visa. I think the debate goes something like this. On one side, people say, if we do that, if we have a provision in our law that says, notwithstanding the facts that you're out of status or you entered illegally or you've overstayed a visa, we forgive you because, let's say you came before the age of 16, so you're innocent. You're innocent of culpability. You didn't have the mental intention to violate the law. Some people will argue that will create a huge incentive for other people to come illegally to the United States with young children, that we would see an immediate exodus of people with very small children, hoping that their children at least would be forgiven and they would have better lives. Other people will say that may be the case, but we have to deal with that by education in the sending countries, by talking about the difficulty of the passage, the dangerousness of the passage, by having more generous family reunification provisions in general. Remember, I mentioned that if your husband is a permanent resident and you want to be sponsored by him from Mexico, you and the children are waiting in Mexico, it may be a 12-year wait. Maybe if we had a better path to reunite the family, we wouldn't have so many children in illegal status. But in my mind, the issue of the forgiveness is essential because we have a generation of young people in the United States who are trapped between a rock and a hard place. They, through no fault of their own, they want to be contributing members of society. They lack documents. I see it as both a humanitarian issue and a national security issue. Why wouldn't we want these people who are loyal to this country, been raised in this country, speak our languages, have skills in education in the United States, why wouldn't we want them to be part of us? Why would we want to make them live in the shadows without documents, not knowing who they are, afraid to go to the police, afraid to use our courts, afraid to become part of our tax-paying system completely?